Hello there, and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb, and today I'm joined by Doctors Rod Rosenblatt, Scott Keith, and Adam Francisco. Thinking Fellows is part of the 1517 podcast network. Go to 1517.org/podcasts to see all of our shows. Today, we always record early, but today is the Tuesday before Here We Still Stand, if you're listening to this the day this comes out. So, which maybe some of you will get to see you at the conference. You'll get to hear us do our live recording. If you're not at the conference or you're not coming this week, we're sorry to have missed you. And tickets for next year's conference will go on sale by the end of the week or something like that. During the conference, they usually go on sale for the next year. So you can keep an eye out for those if you'd like to join us. The Thursday of the opening of the conference, we always do a live recording of the Thinking Fellows and other various shows at the podcast network. So you may want to attend to do that. So that'd be fantastic if you'd join us. And again, if you're there, it'll be great to meet many of you. So I just thought I'd put that as a shout out for the beginning of today's episode. There will also be some links in the show notes today regarding conferences that we will be at, or at least some of us will be at, in Germany and Sweden next year. I think all of our major conferences are conferencing next year is about the freedom of the Christian.
Correct.
So that's going to be the main thing going on in both Germany, Sweden, and Here We Still Stand next year. So we're transitioning to a new topic pretty soon here, which is kind of cool. I like how easy Reformation history makes sort of the topics for every year. You just sort of see what's the popular publication for the year. And
yeah, I can't wait in 2035 to celebrate the second set of editions of the Logi.
Okay. 2035. Oh, man. So,
I was just thinking in 2042 we could celebrate the publication of the Quran with a preface by Martin Luther.
Oh, yeah.
With a preface by Luther.
Yeah.
Boy, there are a lot of things seminary didn't teach me. I had no idea how conversant he was with the Quran.
Yeah.
So that's 2040 what you said?
42.
Wow.
Yeah.
Quite a, you're planning.
These are super
ahead.
nerd celebrations.
Mm-hmm. But today we're going to do sort of a theological topic, sort of a philosophical topic. Hey, did you guys know that the world is coming to an end?
I did know that.
Again.
I did know that. It's been...
just shy of 12 years from now?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a couple episodes ago, I went on a little bit of a rant after my trip to Norway about...
Climate change. And, I do have a stand on it. We don't usually sort of reveal in detail our political stands on this show. I do have a stand on it, but it wasn't as much about my stand on it as it is about how, especially, I think in the United States too, but when I was in Norway, it became very apparent that this is like a religion. And it's a religion that's... all eschatology.
Yeah.
It's all end times. It's all doom and gloom.
Yep.
It's all sort of turn or burn type theology.
And secular.
And secular, yeah. Inherently secular. And there's so many parallels you could make. I was teaching a class yesterday at Community Lutheran on the Augsburg Confession, and I was doing just sort of a broad sweep intro to the Reformation. Of course, indulgences came up. And I said, the modern equivalent, of course, is buying carbon offsets, right?
Sure.
You go on an airplane ride you don't need to go on, but you go for fun, and you have all sorts of guilt over your sin, the amount of carbon consumed to get you from point A to point B. Well, fear not. We can get you out of carbon purgatory. Just send this money, which I wish I had, invested in the companies that do this, to these companies that will take your carbon offset money and do God knows what with it.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, in 2003 or 4 or so, when Rachel and I first moved to England, we were at a theological college at the University of Oxford that had wonderful evangelical Christians. And we were recently married, and we got to know these people. They'd ask things like, so how many kids do you want to have? And we said, well, however many we get. And you were thinking 4 or 5, whatever. And they were just aghast at that. And we didn't understand why. And they told us. There was actually 2 reasons. One was it's a greater burden on the economy in a welfare state. But the other reason, the bigger reason, was the carbon footprint
Even back then, that's
yeah.
that's a
That's
bit
like-
ago now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some interesting. I wonder if I can find the link to it. But LCMS Lutheran actually, Lyman Stone did a bunch of. He did a bunch of statistical data that said, hey, the more kids you have, you might actually be more carbon neutral, because the lifestyle you live tends to have to recycle more out of necessity.
Well,
You have to travel less. all
Easy
that
way to
stuff.
say it is like he's saying like, okay, you're probably going to live in a 2,000 square foot-ish house anyway, and if you have 6 people in that house, it's better utilization of the carbon footprint than if you have 3 people in that
Yeah.
house.
Could we leave this?
Yeah, we probably should too because we're going to get in trouble.
But I mean, regardless of that, I think this is interesting. So he's not the governor of California anymore, but Jerry Brown joined a doomsday clock society a couple of years ago, and this were this was the things that were going to bring the world to an end. All right, so global warming, nuclear weapons, and fake news.
Nuclear.
And fake news
And
was
fake
the
news.
other one that was going to bring the world to an end.
I remember when we were all going to freeze to death.
Me too, actually. That lasted through the early 70s, and I
Yep.
remember watching PBS specials about the next ice age.
Yep.
And of course, I was living in Palmdale at the time, and it was probably summer and 104 degrees outside, and I'm going, actually, can I have a pool?
So, sort of in my mind here for this episode, regardless of sort of which side this takes, because I think you hear lots of end of the world type things from, there's the climate groups are obviously very loud right now, but you sort of hear like the end of the world via progress or technology as well. Is I think a regular one. We see like every once in a
you
while
could-
the robot, the AI
Well,
apocalypse.
it's got a
comes.
conservative bent too. You know, it's this conservatives' perception of what American culture was and or should be has come to an end
Yes.
or is coming to an end. Thus, everything's doomed. You know, and it's like, not quite sure that's
And
true.
I want to say I think the thing for Christians and theologically that we could at least address is, yeah, the world's coming to an end.
Yes.
Like we've been saying this for a long time.
Yes.
Like this is actually a central part of the Christian faith.
Yeah,
Things are in decline.
Yeah, and the risen Christ will call when it happens.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I think is sort of a distinct confusion for me in the way this is approached in society. And, you know, Dave Zoll in his book Seculosity talks about a lot of this stuff. But one of the interesting things is you have a society that sort of refuses to accept death and yet tries to convince you of a distinct eschatology about the end of the world and the end of all things.
Yep.
And the thing that's rough for me is just, and even say like with the global warming stuff, you know, that's fine. I can accept all the data and I can even accept, I guess, your conclusions. But you have a theology, a secular theology that is such that it makes your conclusions confusing to me, right? Your secular theology is that it's progress and everything's getting better, and the more education we have, the better we do, and all this kind of stuff. And then and the flip side of that is, you know, it's all coming to an end right now. And I'm thinking, but this is not unique to the secular society. This has been, you know, a theme within Christianity since the beginning. People since the beginning have believed that the end is coming soon. You know, I do think, though, much like in the secular world, I think that within Christianity, when one focuses on that too much or constructing an entire theology around it as a center of a theology, that it becomes a burden, and that the gospel gets lost in there.
Sure.
I mean, the classic example would be sort of rapture literature, right?
Yeah.
And
Bumper stickers like this: "In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned."
Yep.
And
Yeah.
the Left Behind series, and
Yep.
both the books and I think there are movies too.
Yeah, there are.
The guy from
Kurt
Groin.
Cameron.
Yeah,
Yeah.
part of those.
Growing pains. Yeah.
yeah, and that's I mean, it's not an uncommon sort of I don't know thing to focus on. I mean, it's
The early church though, they obsessed about it a bit. I mean, think of 2 Peter. We're running a series on the blog side of 1517 on 2 Peter. The letter is written in part to give comfort to Christians who are being mocked for their hope that the end is going to come soon. So I think this is a perennial theme, and we've talked before about the church fathers, how they can wax eloquent on justification in one minute, and the next they're talking about the virtues of celibacy, and then they're getting into some kind of millenarianism and so on.
All
so this
true.
is very much a part of in the Middle Ages. I could, if you've heard of Joachim of Fior, and there's a lot of eschatological, apocalyptic thinking. Martin Luther himself was very apocalyptic.
Do you think there's maybe like a contrast to be noted here that when secularism says the world is going to end, it's sort of in an effort to find a solution to stop it, and when Christians say the world's going to come to an end, it's actually part of a prayer to say, "Come, Lord Jesus, now."
Yes.
Like
What a contrast.
End the world, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Well, I think, and no matter what is said, I think that the secular version of this is at the very least an acknowledgement that the law is written within their hearts too. No matter how much sort of thou dost protest too much, that it's not, that it is. I mean, if you believe that all things are doomed, that's the law, baby. And now it's time for the gospel. It's like, let's go.
Well, and I think in particular we see with that it's a personal guilt associated with it too. You brought up the climate credits and things like that as a sort of a modern indulgence. I couldn't agree more, and it has to do with there's a personal guilt from my actions which contribute to the decline of the world. And whether we agree on climate change or not, I mean, part of the doctrine of sin could definitely say, yes, you are a personal contributor to the problem. To the problem of sin, to the end of the world, to the destruction of the world.
Paul comes very close to saying that. You can find a couple of verses that sound like that. That Adam and Eve's fall affected the human nature, or the nature, all of creation.
Yeah. Romans 8:22. I don't
all
know
of
that
creation
off the top of my
groans.
head, but all of creation has been groaning, and the contemporary secularist, if you will, who's worried about the end, it's based on their observation of the created order that it is groaning.
Yeah,
you can't really run away from the law, no matter how hard you try. And you've talked about this, how sort of there has been an attempt to abolish religious order or even ethics as it's known.
Yeah, I mean that's one of
to replace it with something.
And again, I think I'm not sure he does this in as much detail, but this is what Dave Zoll's book Seculosity is in essence about. I wish I'd have thought of writing that book. But the interesting thing is if you look at just even sort of American sort of cultural movements over the last 60 or so years, right? They've sort of distinctly been aimed at destroying any idea of objective right and wrong. And it's sort of with various things, right? So you can go along with, and some things were needed. I've said sometimes when I lecture on the move from modernism to postmodernism, you have to acknowledge that the postmodern mindset brought them some criticisms to modernism that were necessary. And I think of like the pictures of Leave It to Beaver in 1950s America. You're probably not a bad person if you wear shorts and a T-shirt. Even though if you were to sort of watch that cultural icon, if you were an adult, you got up, you got dressed every day, you put on your suit and tie and everything. And so a lot of these even right and wrong things and the change start with, okay, how do we dress? Then how do we act? What's our sexual behavior like? And on and on and on. They tick away at it. My bigger point is that been ticking away at it for 60 years and basically have come to the conclusion that nothing is objectively right or true or wrong or false.
Right.
But then you get this flip, and all of a sudden all sorts of things are completely objectively horrible, not just wrong, but like horrible. Like not just, hey, that's wrong, you should stop doing that, but hey, you did that once, you should be crucified for it. And I think it's an interesting shift to me, and it makes it so clear that no matter that Paul is right, this law is written on our hearts, and no matter how many times we try to kick it loose, it's going to come back, bubble back up in our personal expressions of how things are and how we feel, and the cultural expressions of how things are and what's to be accepted behavior and what's not. All of a sudden, we have a whole list of behaviors that are not acceptable, given to us from a society that told us anything is permissible.
I kind of think one of the Christian reactions that's common is that's not the right law. Like they're not feeling guilty of the 10 Commandments as spelled out in Scripture. And I think that's sort of a habit we have to break. I think of Walther when he says the preacher's job is just to know when the law has done its job. Well, also to know where the law has done its job in various forms. I mean, this seems to be something that we need to have a better handle on identifying that this is also the law at work, and that you can move people to sort of that precise revealed law from here, but that it's not a bad thing that sort of nature is working on the conscience in society.
No, and I think as a theologian or pastor or father or whatever, the idea behind law and gospel is to be able to recognize the law and to recognize the gospel.
Yeah.
Or the title of the book that you're referring to, the proper distinction between law and gospel, right? That you're able to see this is the law. This is how it's working. This is God's law. This is how God is working on people through His law. This is when it's done its work is to ask the question, well, what is its work? And I think what Walther's referring to there is when it's done its work is when it's it's crushed, when it's broken down, when it's left without any other option.
Yeah, no hope.
No hope. And to know when it's done its work is to know when to preach the gospel.
Yeah, so I guess this would be the question, and I'll just sort of phrase it directly even. If somebody feels guilty to the point where they're paying a secular indulgence, should you preach the gospel to that person, or should you make them repent of some other sin first?
I'd preach the gospel to those people. I mean, after I stop shaking my head and scratching my head at how confusing this whole thing is to me. But I mean, somebody who feels guilty enough to write a $1,000 check because they flew on to a company that's supposedly going to give them a carbon offset, they're dealing with a lot of guilt, man. I mean, I think they've got the guilt part nailed in a lot of ways, at least in that one area. And I mean, there's opportunity there, I think, for the Christian to say, I see you have half of the equation right.
Yeah.
You are guilty.
Can I ask a basic question? You keep referring to carbon offset. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Plants some
okay.
trees that produce oxygen.
Is that what it is?
So there are this started in the sort of the company world, where a company would become green by recycling everything.
Okay.
That all their waste.
So you're offsetting some damage you did.
So there would be
somewhere
bigger
else.
companies that have a manufacturing process that can't be turned green. And so in order to make up for that, they would buy credits. They would pay this other company
And they would
for some of their credits.
Yeah,
That's fascinating. I mean, that isn't.
Now this has trickled
Yeah,
down.
it is
This
an
has trickled
indulgence.
down to the personal world, where now you say fly on an airplane for vacation or something like that, and you put personally 15 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere because of this. So you pay some charity that does green work for a credit.
Right.
That says they're going to plant...
Which is probably tax deductible, by the way.
Yeah. They're going to plant 50 trees in your name because those trees over their lifetime will absorb 15 tons of carbon dioxide or something.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But again, this started off as actually like a corporate program for...
Now people combined.
It was common for car companies, for
Right.
instance. Like,
Well, sometimes governmentally mandated.
correct.
But Rod wanted us to get off this topic.
Well, you kept on using this term. I didn't know how common it was.
It's just because I've been thinking a lot lately of how similar this is to or the Roman Catholic system of indulgences. I mean, it deals your impact, your carbon imprint, deals with it as sort of sin as just a thing that can be sort of offset by something good. And it deals with it. It's so similar to Roman Catholic theology on this point that I think I can't believe that. In other words, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like a former really upset Roman Catholic that thought up of the idea because it's so similar.
Well, I mean, I'll do an example that's not really political. So I love to snowboard. I really like snowboarding. The way this came to my attention is that one of the snowboarders I like to watch his videos of did a big Alaska helicopter snowboarding trip, right? So he flew from New Jersey to Alaska because that's where he lives, and then he did helicopters up and down this mountain.
I mean, he's just stacking up the tons of carbon impact at that point
He's been
by the tonnage.
He's been an advocate for this thing called Protect Our Winters, okay? And he said, I realize that my line of work, by doing this, it has an incredible carbon footprint, and it makes me a hypocrite to tell people to live a more green life. But I literally didn't say even, like, this is my job. He's like, I love snowboarding. This is my passion. I can't stop. Okay, so I'm going to buy all these credits, which sort of proves another thing about sin. He finds himself guilty. He believes what he's doing
but I can't stop.
is sin, but I can't stop.
Yep.
So I'm going to buy credits instead.
I mean, there are direct parallels here to bad theology. Is my point. I mean, they're not. It's not even. I guess I have made it sound more political than I'm thinking of it. There are direct parallels to bad theology here.
Well, it has nothing to do with whether global warming is real or not.
No.
If this is a bad system of
I
dealing
mean, you
with
could say to this guy, maybe you should feel guilty. Maybe your guilt is, correctly placed in this case. You are doing all these things. Maybe if you are concerned about the impact of burning fossil fuels on the planet, you really should think about your behavior about flying from New Jersey to Alaska and taking 20 helicopter rides from the top of Denali to the bottom or whatever. If these things are all true, you ought to consider that when you do that. And if you're sort of your secular theology is such that you think that not only is it true, but it's a sin and I'm impacting and contributing to a greater sin, you ought to think about these things and do something. The question is, what do you do? And at the end of the day, theologically, there's two answers to that question. That's you either, if we're talking about sin and your relationship before God because of your sin, there's either you can earn his satisfaction, his countenance towards you back, or he's going to give it to you freely on account of Christ. And I think that's why, we can't put our head in the sand with some of these things and just say, oh, I don't agree with the politics of that person. But we did this in the philosophy episode. Think of the logical backbone of what they're saying, and even sort of the philosophical and theological implications are huge here.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're a person that makes the claim that there are no truth claims and yet you make this truth claim,
Sure.
That's a problem. And somebody should call you out on that. If you're constructing an entire secular theology here, maybe somebody ought to call you out on the fact that you're now doing theology. You're no longer in the realm of politics. You're literally doing theology here. So the bigger question isn't, it's are you doing good theology or bad theology? And from my perspective, it's bad. Even if everything about climate change that they say is true is absolutely true, this is still bad theology.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the takeaway here, and I think it directly relates to this idea of sort of throwing everything out and now sort of starting anew. We have to have all of the things we've already hashed out in history rehashed out again, like paying for sins.
Well, and at least maybe acknowledge it if you think the world's coming to an end, that you're in good company.
Yeah.
And it's not a unique thought. That this is the law has worked this way on people before, and there's been one of two answers to it. Well, do something about it and or flee to Christ.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the other things I noticed with this is sort of the guilt and the fear over the world ending is one of the easiest things to manipulate within people to like some sort of action. Like I just saw presidential candidate like comforting a crying girl at a rally saying, I don't want to die, I'm too young to die, I'm going to die when the planet dies. Right? It sort of and then the candidate said, well, if you vote for me, we're going to make sure that you don't die. I'm like, this kind of thing is very easily manipulated
You think? I mean,
well, do you remember? I do.
Fascism will come to America with a smiley face. Was that George Orwell, I think, who said that?
Yeah. I was, growing up, I was very good friends. My best friend lived down the street from me. I mean, parents were always very good to my mom as she was trying to raise my brother and I by herself. They're very nice people, friends to this day, but they were Pentecostal, and they were like hardcore Pentecostal. And they were hardcore Pentecostal during a time of a movement within their church. I forgot which one it was, where end times theology was the center and circumference of what they believed, taught, and confessed in their church.
It's been almost from the beginning in the Pentecostal movement.
And And so I remember being young, going to my little First Lutheran church in Palmdale, California, and occasionally, and by occasionally I mean probably once a year, maybe going to church with my buddy, and just coming out of that, if you took everything to heart that the preacher was saying for 3 hours, which was difficult, you came out of that afraid, And as I got older and still kept in touch with them, that sort of daily diet of bad theology didn't do their children any good in the long term. And if you were to go to something like that as an adult, and I think every secular person, if they were to sit in on a 2-hour sermon that was turn or burn, if you better do something about your life because Christ's coming tomorrow, and if he comes and you're doing X, Y, or Z, you're going to die. And if secular people came in and watched sermons like that where there's a bunch of little kids in there, they'd say, man, this is tantamount to child abuse.
Yeah.
And, I see children crying on television because their parents are telling them or allowing others to tell them that there's absolutely no hope, and I think this is the same kind of crushing bad theology that the church has spun or allowed to be spun for years.
Yeah.
And that needs to be, that's a lot of law.
Yeah.
you need a little bit of gospel there, and a little bit of gospel will go a long way.
Well,
in that, and that's why I'm saying this is my problem with it isn't political, or it's at least not just political. It's theological. This is bad theology, and when it's shoved down the ears of children day in and day out too. What are you doing? That's not good parenting.
Many of my generation could tell about what it was like to be in a Bible camp during the summer, and those movies were shown. That the world is going to end soon. Get your life together. Terrified him. Would have terrified me. My dad had the good sense never to allow me to go to such nonsense. But
I went to a good Lutheran Bible camp. It was good.
It was good. I wonder if if even the church should preach sort of directly at this. You're forgiven for destroying the planet too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not an objection that you haven't contributed at all, because come on. Paul, like Adam pointed out, Romans 8, right, 22.
Yep.
Creation is groaning because of your contribution. If even your contribution was just in Adam's fall, we all fell.
Yeah.
Right.
Creation's been groaning for however long. I don't even want to get into that until now.
And sort of the pastoral reaction shouldn't be, well, it's not real anyways. I mean, because, again, the data on this kind of thing is totally debatable, but should just simply be our standard gospel answer. You are forgiven for this as well.
Yeah, for this as well.
And
that was not part of the Pentecostal message.
No, absolutely not. And it's not part of this message in this bad secular theology either. It's a theology of all law.
The part that gets to me is that in postmodernism, all meta-narratives are called false, no matter which one it is.
Except for this one.
Yeah.
And a few others.
Right. And then why not close the universities?
Yeah.
Well, the fun
because a lot of those professors have jobs.
Yeah.
You gotta.
Well, it's hard not to be a cynic.
Yeah.
It's hard not to be cynical. I think of Paul saying to the Thessalonians, who were being taught by some screwball, that the resurrection had already occurred and they were all left behind. And Paul's answer to that one, that's in the Thessalonian epistles.
Yeah, I mean it's a good point that this is like a postmodern problem, right? This is not postmodernism anymore, because this and other things too are a meta narrative. This is a pretty grand narrative.
And an attempt at an objective sort of set of rules
Right.
as well, which means you're right.
Yeah,
it's sort of like
They want to correct how I talk.
yeah.
That was the wrong pronoun. There is no such thing as a wrong pronoun. I'm under the First Amendment. I may have to clean up my grammar a little to make it understandable, but don't tell me that I've used the wrong word.
That's a meta narrative too.
Yeah.
System of rules.
That's my point. Yeah, I mean if society is just going to create a theology, what we got to realize is that it's going to be a law-based theology. There
Yep.
will be no gospel in
Yep.
it. And what it will produce is broken people.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it can't really. There isn't really an option for the gospel to to be self-produced by that. That's sort of the Christian claim, right? Is that no religion could have the gospel even if it wanted it, because it took an actual action. It took
Sure.
an actual
The
crucifixion,
linkage,
an actual
and
resurrection.
the linkage between the Genesis account of the fall and what Paul writes in Romans 5. Schaefer, I remember I was in conversation with him. He said, if I can take away a historic Adam, I can parry any evangelistic technique you try on me.
Well, yeah. I like that. I mean, it's true.
Anything else?
I do love it when Rod refers to just talking to Francis Schaeffer, too. That's like, yeah.
Hanging out
We were
on a
hanging
hillside.
out at a hillside in Switzerland one Sunday afternoon.
That is kind of
Yeah.
kind of funny. Yeah, you drop these names that I'm like, wait, I think I've read his books.
Yeah, well,
he's a big name.
Yeah,
I have read
he's got sort of the, I think, what is still probably the classic Christian response to this in his book.
How then should we live?
No, the one that's on sort
There's
of.
a Christian response to the environmental
Environmental.
problem,
Yes.
or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yes.
I read it with my daughter when she was kind of working through some of this stuff. The
Uh,
death of. Oh, I'll look it up.
I'll put it in the show notes when we find it too. I have it on my bookshelf as well. I don't think I've read that. I've read through. He's got a volume of. There's a volume of collected.
Yes, there is a box
And
set.
That one I've read through, but I don't think I've done this.
He really gave genuine epistemological hope to a whole generation of Christians when nobody was doing it.
I think that's probably
Called
one of the.
Pollution and the Death of Man.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
That's probably one of the areas here that's also available for sort of capture in our response to this is epistemology, because a lot of this that one of those other marks on the doomsday clock was fake news, and whether you're sort of like on the Trumpian fake news team or the other side of whatever side it is of fake news out there, this is actually a big societal problem that people cannot discern. People have lost the ability to discern which information is true,
Sure.
which isn't, which has only been perpetuated by just the amount of information that and how quickly it can be spread via
Yep.
the internet.
Yep.
Well, this is the James A. Sire's response to this, right? Is that everybody believes something.
Yeah.
You may say that you don't. You may sort of protest that you don't, but you won't live as if you don't. And so everybody believes something. The question is, what is it that you believe, and on what is that belief based?
Yep. The volume was, why should anyone believe anything at all?
Yep.
And I think it's a good question. Is a lot of people will, I can imagine, be uncomfortable with saying, "Hey, you should forgive people for a law being guilty to a law that isn't even the precisely revealed one." Well, I think again, part of this is asking what makes you believe that this is the law.
That's right.
Right? Can I move this person to the capital L law?
Sure.
And I think that is not just a sort of it is theological, but that is hugely a part of somebody's epistemology. Whether they believe that this revealed law is the capital L law or sort of this assumed law is
I don't
the
know
capital L.
if I'd let somebody tell me that that's not the law. I mean, to give you the example of your snowboarder, you have a person who's convinced that who they are is damaging to the entire world,
Yeah.
and also is so convinced of their sin that they know they can't change who they are.
Yep.
I'm not sure I'd allow anybody to tell me that's not the law.
Yeah.
I kind of think it is the law. I mean, I think you can clean it, you can catechize that law a little, quite a bit actually, and sort of give them the Decalogue, sort of show them what that fits under in there. But at the same time, even if it's just, sinning against love thy neighbor as thyself, I mean, that's a fairly easy one to clean up.
Well, you're right, because what he's also ultimately admitting is that he knows he's doing some wrong and he continues to do it. Whether You know,
Yep. No matter how you fill in the blank.
Yeah, no matter which number that one falls under, which is probably just simply love your neighbor as yourself. You know, if you believe that what you do or who you are is helping contribute to the end of the world or the death of somebody out there or something like that, and you sort of refuse to stop. It's a pretty hard one not to be just straight up guilty of. And I guess the thing for Christians is to sort of admit their guilt in breaking this same law one way or another as well. In this thing.
Yeah, think of the immediate answer of the rich young ruler. Rabbi, I've done that since I was a child, all of it. And you go, "Doh."
Don't you think that might be the new one that we start hearing with all this? Is people start to make
Lord, I've done this since my youth.
lifestyle changes, or the children are sort of forced into capitulating with this from a young age.
Yeah.
I've been buying carbon offset credits since my youth. Like that's sort of interesting.
If you create a bad theology based on essentially dumbed down law, what people will naturally do is make that achievable.
Yes.
So that they can rise to it.
Yes.
Most people won't be like your snowboarder friend and realize, I'm a broken person here who's got to do this kind of trivial thing at the end of the day.
He knows where his bread is buttered.
Yeah,
I mean,
most people will be like, well, okay, so here's the law in my theology that I've created. Let me build a ladder to get to the top of that law. And they'll do it. This was the rich young ruler. Lord, I've done this since my youth. Yeah. These things I've done.
Well, and people like that snowboarder sort of become, religious elites. He's sort of aware of the truth, can tell other people what to do with their life, how to change it, but his lifestyle's sort of untouchable because he's good at it for X, Y, or Z reason, and so his way of dealing with it isn't actually changing like he's asking other people to do. It's just spending some of that money he gets paid to fly on that helicopter to offset the helicopter. It's kind of an interesting. At the
end of the day, the law will accuse.
Yes,
and so it does.
Interesting.
And Luther believed that was his primary purpose, and made no bones about it. The primary purpose of the law is to break us.
Oh yeah, I mean that's hard to escape. In Jesus, in Paul.
Yeah.
Certainly in Luther. I mean, why? If that's not the point of the law, why did Jesus, when the rich young ruler said, "This I've done since my youth," why didn't he just say, "Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're set."
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. He
just upped it.
He ups the ante until the man is broken.
Yep.
Yeah.
Until he's broken.
Which took him all of one sentence to do.
Yeah.
That's sort of like one of the miraculous, the things about Jesus' ministry was like the thing he's ultimately put to death for is forgiving sins. But you go read through the New Testament, and man, is he preaches the law and just preaches it constantly. I don't think you can top how quickly Jesus crumbles people's worldviews.
No, he's a master of breaking people.
It's kind of interesting. Like when you read the account of his life, I see just so much proclaiming the law, and then he's put to death for forgiving sins. So those things obviously go hand in hand. That's sort of the reformers picked up on, at least. This is pretty much time. Anything I do want to say, I really hope nobody just gets offended and turns this episode off or something like that, because I think it is a fair question, no matter sort of what you believe or think is true about this particular subject. I mean, I think
it's hard for me to think somebody'd be offended at what we just said.
Yeah.
Well, I also think
we didn't say exactly what we would
even say no matter what side listeners think we fall on, epistemologically, I'm open to the data on either side. On any of this.
Sure.
And whether or not the data comes out to say that I am personally responsible for caused climate change, I know I'm responsible because
Sure.
in Adam's fall, I fell as well.
Sure.
And I know I'm responsible.
Sure.
I know I'm a contributor to the end of the world, and the end of the world is coming.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whether it comes through climate change, I don't think so because the scriptures speak otherwise, unless that's sort of the
Unless
fiery destruction
Yeah.
that's spoken of.
Yes.
But at the same time, I know it's coming, and I know when it comes, who will be sounding the trumpet, and I know that along with everybody else, who he raises from the dead and who's still alive when he comes, my knee shall bow with everyone else's,
Yep. Yep.
and I will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord,
Yep.
Yeah.
And
So-
along with every other creature.
along with
Well,
every
and
other
it
creature.
sort of brings things to the point. The point when people start telling you that the world is ending, it's not to say no, it's not. It's to say yes, it is. And by the way,
There's your
you're gonna need this.
or evangelistic angle.
It is, yeah. You're right. It is ending.
Absolutely.
And every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord.
Yeah.
Mine and everyone else's who's ever lived.
Yep.
So you gotta go, guys. You heard it first. Thinking Fellows declare that the world is gonna end
Yeah.
someday.
We're a little
somehow.
foggy on
Yeah.
the date and time, but other than that,
Oh, that's great. Well, I hope I hope for what it's worth, people enjoyed this episode. I think this was pretty fair treatment of a religious issue that is hidden in secular clothing.
yeah, and we didn't even get into like the people predicting,
Time.
10 years or 12 years, just like the millennial Christian prophets do.
Yeah.
I remember when you were growing up, we lived in Carson City. There was I forgot his name, but he lived in Sacramento, and he bought billboards like all over Northern California and Northern Nevada, and one of them went up in Carson City, and it's some Christian prophet that was
Yes.
predicting when Christ would come, and he did it to the hour. It was like, I don't
Yeah.
remember exactly,
Wow.
but it was like August 10th, 2006 at 9:36 p.m. And
What happened?
it came and went. And he's
After.
like, "Oops," and that's kind of,
Did he
there's
submit to stoning? Or
there's a direct parallel there to all of this too. I mean, people, you can't. Oh, you were ending the show. Sorry, can't peek behind the curtain, people.
No, you can't. I mean, it'd be kind of fun for one of those guys to be right one day, but because it doesn't really. This is one of I did want to end the show, but this is one of the funny things. It doesn't really matter when if you cling to Christ, like the when, the how, the date.
Yeah.
If that guy's right or wrong,
Yep.
It'll come like a thief in the night.
that's right.
Yeah, there are several verses which say, "It will not surprise you."
Yeah.
But there are others where, when he was pressed to be more specific, he declined.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, great guys. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode. I know at the beginning of the episode I talked a lot about "Here We Still Stand" is this week, and you should try to join us next year if you didn't already. This year, it's a really fun time, and it's great for us to be able to do that live show and to be able to talk with people during that 3-day weekend who listen to the show. The conference is theological, but the conversations that happen there with people tend to just be fun. Whether they're directly about theology or just about breakfast in the morning. So, hey, thanks for listening to this episode. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.